Okay, Clay. So we've made it to the end of a season of Deadwood, the first season. Congratulations. Happy to be here.
Thank you.
Hope you feel the same.
Thank you. I've been here once, possibly twice before.
Possibly twice. 2.5.
It's new every time.
I feel the same. I'm always a little bit surprised by how it ends. Everything blurs together a little bit. And Amy and me were just looking at we have this book about like the episode recaps, and we were just looking ahead to season 2. And Amy was just like, "Wow, a lot of stuff I didn't remember happening in season 2 happens in season 2." It is kind of just a blur that way. But I thought since we made it to the end of the first season, I have this the book here that I've been reading from the Deadwood Bible. And he explains a little bit about how the season was supposed to end originally before they started producing things.
Can I guess?
Sure. So I'll give you a character. One character is Bullock. How does Bullock's story end?
Bullock's story ends with him and Swearengen fighting each other for 45 minutes in a volcano planet.
Godzilla style. Just the buildings are just being crushed underneath their feet as they smash into each other. No, that was stolen for Godzilla versus, was it King Kong? Yeah, that was that. We watched that movie the other last year or whatever.
Man, that movie was great.
Mecha Swearengen.
Yeah, it's dumb as hell, but that was a very enjoyable movie. I saw a lot of people talking shit about that, and I was like, "What do you expect?"
Yeah,
they went to the Hollow Earth. Like, what more do you want?
Yeah, they did. They saw Kong's throne or whatever, right? That's that movie. I'm not
they didn't do that in Deadwood. I can tell you that much.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, they there's no Mecha Swearengen. There's no colossal fight with what is King Kong's weapon? He has like a sword or something, an axe.
Oh, I don't remember. Yeah, some sort of big hatchet thing.
So, this is from the Deadwood Bible. According to writers,
real quick.
Yeah,
that's another thing where it's like in the first Godzilla movie. I think it was the first one.
Yep.
I think it was the second one. They discover like the underwater temple of Godzilla, which on its own would be the single greatest archaeological find in the history of humanity,
right?
And then immediately nuke it with a nuclear bomb. And then in this one, they discover Hollow Earth and this other society that exists down there, and like this giant throne to King Kong. They nuke it with a nuclear bomb.
They were all dead, right? All the Kongese or whatever you call them.
Yeah. I guess there's nobody there, still,
it's like grave robbing King Tut. Where's the harm? Where's the harm in that, Clay?
It's like when you hear about they discovered one of the pyramids, and then they started digging up the other ones by just like lobbing dynamite inside it.
Just get it out of there. You know that the pyramids used to be smooth. That's always the most amazing thing to me, right?
Yes.
You think they're staggered, but they originally they'd laid limestone on it, and it was a perfectly smooth pyramid, but the rain washed it away. So there's your fact about ancient Egypt history for the day. According to writers and producers, Bullock's season 1 story might have ended with the elections for mayor and marshal, a countywide office. In scenes drawn from history, Bullock would lose the election for marshal due to corruption, refuse to accept defeat, and barricade himself in a building with his badge and gun until being talked into surrendering. Bullock as fugitive, barricaded like a gangster at the end of a classic mob film, would have been a sardonic comment on the righteousness machismo that powers so many Westerns. The takeaway would be that Bullock's self-image as the bringer of law was so important to him that he'd rather become a public menace than let it go. That was the original Bullock ending. So the second one is a little bit more opaque, I guess. It's not known exactly where Swearengen's story might have ended. Originally, he was supposed to follow through with having Dan Doherty murder Sophia. And according to Ray McKinnon, if the Reverend Smith had gotten murdered by road agents, as Milch had originally discussed, and it is historically accurate, it would have been Swearengen or Tolliver that ordered the hit because the pastor's sermons were dampening their profits. These ideas were changed or abandoned once Milch surrendered to the hive mind that is Deadwood. So, changed a lot from the conception of the series.
All of those options they're just too dark.
Yeah, they seem a little bit big. Well, the Bullock thing seems a little big. That seems like an action movie or something. That doesn't really seem like it fits the series as it is.
Yeah, and it doesn't really, I don't know if that fits as a season finale either.
No. It's hard to... How does Bullock come back from that, I guess? Maybe Bullock wasn't supposed to.
That's the thing, is like all of these things that you're naming are like, for characters, they're kind of thresholds they'd be very difficult to come back from.
Murdering the Reverend would have been interesting. Like, well, I guess, and we'll get into it, but murdering the Reverend in a way that is different from the way that it happens here would have been strange for Swearengen, too. So that's probably would have been Tolliver that would have done it.
Yeah, it would have been very out of character, I think, for Al, because his whole thing in the last half of the season is this weird compassion that he has for the Reverend, and then just to have him picked off by road agents doesn't really jive with that.
It would work for Tolliver, I think, with the machinations that Tolliver's trying to do at the end of this episode. I could see that as the cementing Tolliver as a bad guy action that takes place in the finale.
I think the tough thing about it is like at this point with the Reverend, excuse me, he's not really. He's kind of a non-entity.
Yeah.
Like he's still out there, but part of the story is that people are ignoring him while he's dying, basically.
Yeah.
And so I don't really think it would be something that Cy would go so far out of his way to kill the guy just because he was annoying or whatever.
Well, we're going to get into it. We're going to play the music, and then we're going to break down the season finale of the first season of Deadwood, Sold Under Sin.
You're listening to a podcast that is a lie agreed upon. Join Wes and Clay as they discuss HBO's Deadwood and tell you something pretty.
Episode 12 of the first season of Deadwood is called Sold Under Sin, directed by Davis Guggenheim, written by Ted Mann. In this episode called Sold Under Sin, a band of cavalry rides into town, including the Yankton magistrate Claggett and General Crook, who is seeking reprisals against the Indians for Little Bighorn. The doc asks Swearengen to arrange for a girl to care for the Reverend. Alma's father, Otis, asks her to bail him out of debt or he'll create problems for her in New York. Bullock pounds Otis's face until he spits his teeth onto the floor. Sheriff Con Stapleton shoots a Chinaman who is in an altercation with Leon. Bullock visits Alma to say that they will deal with her father later, and the two make love. Swearengen takes the Reverend in his arms and smothers him. Adams cuts Claggett's throat and removes the warrant from the magistrate's pockets. Bullock tells Swearengen, "I'll be the fucking sheriff." So here we are.
So Sold Under Sin is definitely like an early 80s Judas Priest album.
Yeah, it's a good title.
That's a good one, yeah.
Do you have, I'll read the episode titles to you quickly. What's the best one? Deadwood, Deepwater, Reconnoitering the Rim, Here Was a Man, The Trial of Jack McCall, Plague, Bullock Returns to Camp, Suffer the Little Children, No Other Sons or Daughters, Mr. Wu, Jules' Boots is Made for Walking, or Sold Under Sin?
I'm Sold Under Sin.
Yeah, Sold Under Sin.
Easily.
Bullock Returns to the Camp is a strong second, but only because it's so poetic.
Yeah.
Sold Under Sin is good.
That's why they play it. They've been playing it every show for 45 years.
Every behind the music special is just them bitching about how they can't escape the power and the gravitas of that song.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So we do the Star Trek podcast, where we're currently covering, as we're talking about this episode, these Deadwood episodes. We're in the middle of season 3 of Star Trek Picard, and a patron asked me on our recent review of one of the latest Star Trek Picard episodes, Clay, they asked me if I have ever been medically diagnosed as being unable to feel pleasure. And it hurt me. It cut me deep because I was like, maybe this patron knows me better than I know myself. However,
did you just say no? I'm just British.
Then I sat down to watch the season finale of Deadwood, and you know what? I realized something. I realized that patron was just running his cunt mouth at me, because I feel I love this episode. I think it's so good.
Yeah.
I think the season is so good. I think the show is so good, and it makes me tremendously happy to watch this show. And I think that this is such a prime, and to compare it to and contrast it to Picard. Isn't it so wonderful when a season builds towards something? You get to the end and it all kind of comes together. Maybe not perfectly. We're not talking about like Wire-esque levels of every plot line is closed. But at the same time, I don't need every plot line to be closed. But I just feel that the first season of Deadwood really culminates in something. And this is probably the best episode of the season, I think. it's got a lot of great moments in it, which we'll get into. But what do you think?
Yeah, I thought it was great. Again, the show excels at weaving its plots together and dipping in for just the right amount of time with each one of them, and the way that they sling Seth Bullock back and forth in his own across his own conscience is it's great. Like it's a treatment of a character like him that I find so interesting and so compelling, that they've been establishing what this guy's like, how he's sort of a cliche, how he's not, what his flaws are, and somehow they managed to touch on all of them in the same episode.
Yeah,
by having him get too hot-tempered, and then having him break down and become one of the people he hates by going over and telling them they should kill Alma's father.
Yeah, by trying to right his wrong in a seedy way, an underhanded kind of way.
Yeah, and then he's obviously he's got Saul there, who's kind of his conscience that's pulling him back, and then he's got his Virgil Earp in him, where he sees the injustice of the corrupt sheriff.
Yeah,
which pushes him to take up the star, which he didn't want to do, and it's just really well done.
There's a blood stain on your floor.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that. Crook's forces in full retreat.
Taking Mrs. Garrett's father with him.
Up and about so quick.
He's slung over a mule.
Alive is my point. Doherty give me to understand you just as soon as seen him dead.
If that man comes back to the camp, he'd be my problem to deal with.
The way you and Hickok dealt with Ned Mason.
No. I'll be the fucking sheriff.
Bullock's kind of Bullock's the main.
A lot for one episode too. They do a lot with him in this episode.
Yeah, it is a Bullock episode, I think, more than anybody else. He is kind of he is the focus of this one, and you spend a lot of time with him bouncing back and forth between people. You also didn't mention just the talking to General Crook and getting sort of like that perspective about why he should be the sheriff, and then he has his affair with Alma after he's kind of cleansed himself. He has an adulterous affair with his girlfriend in town, and then he finally, through kind of a mixed emotions, accepts the badge to be sheriff and the responsibilities that go along with it, for not quite on the up and up reasons either as to why he accepts that role towards the end. So it is a Bullock bonanza, as they say in the show. However, I will say, I haven't really noticed it before, but I thought that this episode really highlighted it, is that Oliphant's performance is not perfect, unfortunately. I don't think it damages the episode, but I do notice... Do you feel the same? I have a hard time sort of clarifying why I don't think he's 100% right for it, and... I think it mostly shows in the scenes where he is seething frustration about what he's done. And I wouldn't describe him as whiny, and I wouldn't describe him as like poorly, like his motivations make sense and everything to me. So the character makes sense in and of himself, and I think that his performance is okay. And I wouldn't want him to be any more rough and tumble, because then I think he fits more into the cliche of what this character would be at the same time. But I find him a little bit, and he's supposed to be, but I find him, I guess, like a little bit annoying in a way that I'm not sure is 100% intentional. Do you agree with any of that?
Yeah, I still think he's the weakest link acting wise in the show. I think a lot of it is that when he goes into like smoldering anger mode, he reacts unlike any human being I've ever seen react to an emotion.
Right.
It's like he just gets like really tight and starts like almost shaking. He's so mad. Like that's not something that people like normally do in real life.
Yeah.
It's so strange because I mean, I say that in the same episode where you've got Brad Dourif giving what should have been an Emmy-winning performance, just turning it up to 25, screaming at God
he's so good
about the exploding legs during the Civil War.
If I was a more adaptable primate or one of your regular petitioners, I suspect I wouldn't feel this pain. I guess I'd have a wad of cartilage covering the patella, protecting me from this discomfort. Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. Just please, God, take that minister. What conceivable godly use is his protracted suffering to you? What conceivable godly use? What conceivable godly use was the screaming of all those men? Did you need to hear their death agonies to know your omnipotence? Mom! Mother Fun Mom! Mommy! They shot my leg off! It hurts so bad. It hurts so bad.
There's something about Oliphant that it's just, I don't know. It's like I feel like he's trying too hard
Maybe.
to keep it under the red line. Like I think that's what he's doing, right? Like he's trying to play this guy as someone who's got all this internalized anger, and then even when it starts to bubble to the surface, he's still, every bit of him is trying to tamp it down. But I don't know. I just think he might be going too far with it or something.
Would you say that he portrays his frustration too obviously, or like, because I have a hard time because I feel like the character should be easily read by others as that is his flaw, like that he's very easy. Like Swearengen does it in the first couple episodes of like immediately identifying that he's a hothead and you can get around him that way. Mm-hmm. So it's tough because if he was played any more like John Wayne, Gary Cooper cool, right? Like that wouldn't read on screen because you would,
right? Yeah.
The other characters would be sort of drawing inferences about him that I don't think that those actors would be able to portray. So I don't mind it, but I wonder about like Amy's always talking about when she seems, she's like, oh, Seth, you're such a dipshit. Like it's that kind of thing. And he is, and that's sort of the point. So I don't know how much I can hold against his performance at this point. It's hard.
Yeah, I don't know.
But I agree that he's the weakest actor, so I don't really know where I would go with him.
Even so, I don't know if him appearing to be the weakest actor is because he's doing such a specific performance that kind of doesn't allow him to do more nuanced stuff. I don't know. Yeah, because I mean, I always thought he was fine. Anything I see him in, he's fine. You know.
Well, the other in the book that they talk about that he was traditionally cast as a sort of like non-leading man, like he's a kind of like goofball character actor, sort of like he has the looks of a leading man, but is more suited to playing sort of like the California surfer dude guy, like and he plays that in a lot of other shows that he's done and stuff like that. More of a almost like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo type, like a very laid back. And when you watch him do late night shows, he's much more relaxed and sort of easygoing than Bullock is.
Yeah.
So it's definitely off of his personality to play someone like Bullock.
Yeah. The only other thing I knew him from before Deadwood was Scream 2.
Yes.
And he has a certain intensity in that movie too. And then when it comes to the end where he's going to jack it up, he kind of, I don't know. He goes pretty over the top, but yeah, it's funny because like I feel like after this, he gets a little typecast as sort of just doing this over and like he goes into
Justified more or less and stuff like that.
Yeah, more or less the same kind of character that's in Justified, and let's not forget your favorite movie, Hitman.
Oh yeah, yep. Yeah.
I assume that's what he's like in Hit. I didn't see it. But
No.
based on the trailer and the poster, I'm assuming that's what it's like.
Yeah, and based on his financial situation at the time, I'm sure they were just like, do Seth Bullock with a bald head. And he
Even in, he was the villain in Die Hard 4, I think.
Yes. Yep.
And I don't remember. Yeah, he's fine.
Yeah. No,
he's on The Office for a hot second after Michael Scott leaves.
Yep, he was in Sex and the City.
Fine.
He's one of Carrie's boyfriends, I think. He was fine in that. I just really noticed it in an episode so prominently about Bullock, and I wouldn't say it torpedoes the episode or anything. I think he's fine, but like I really notice it in scenes like when he's talking to Dan in the Gem, after he beats up Otis Russell and he comes over to explain that he doesn't think he killed them and that they need to make sure that he doesn't walk out of Deadwood, Otis Russell. Mm-hmm. Doherty and Earl Brown has so little to say and do in that scene. He just has to listen. But I really feel that Brown just crushes that scene in a way that Oliphant doesn't for some reason.
Mm-hmm. I won't do a 2-on-1. Take turns like white men.
I don't care if the whole U.S. cavalry walks in here. You don't want to pour another drink. You just want to listen to me, because if the man doesn't die whose face I just broke, he's going to go to New York City and tell Alma Garret's people it breaks his heart to say so, but his daughter had their son murdered. He'll tell them. Knowing how he does, they won't want their son's rightful property in the hands of the woman who killed him. He'll swear to what he heard from her own lips, and those society people in New York City who live with their heads up their asses anyway will believe him. And whoever they send out here may take up to 15 minutes before they decide, being you were involved in the transaction first to last, it must have been you and your boss she hired to push her idiot husband off the cliff. Of course, they'll be wrong about Mrs. Garret, but they'll be right as rain about you two cocksuckers. You tell them all that upstairs.
If he don't die.
If he don't die. I don't think I killed him.
Just so I understand you. If he don't die, you're saying the man's luck don't have to hold out. Now that's the message you want me to take upstairs.
I don't swim in that shit.
You ought to pin that on your chest. You're hypocrite enough to wear it.
I did really like that scene. I think more so for what the scene was maybe than how he played it. Because that's the scene where Bullock really kind of goes over the line.
Yes.
I think everybody else is kind of doing more nuanced stuff than he is. I think Dan is doing much more just listening basically than Oliphant is trying to speak through his gritted teeth and look at him really intensely, you know?
Yeah. The stuff that I do like about it is very thematic and character based, and it's been a whole season about exposing the inherent contradictions of these characters and the way that they think and the way that all the possible different outcomes that you have to come together to make this civilization that's starting to brew into place. And what I think that the story in this one does is by interweaving Swearengen and Bullock is that you walk away from it never really quite sure where the line for good and bad sits for either of the characters. A lot of it is about the stuff that you want, like the catharsis of the thing that you want to happen resulting in bad outcomes down the line. Mm-hmm. And the stuff that you think is going to make you feel bad, like the death of Smith, is actually done in a way that it is the right thing to do in that situation, in contrast to Bullock beating up Otis Russell, which is very cathartic because you see a character kick the shit out of a character that no one likes in the show and no one watching the show as an audience member likes. Mm. But you end up in a very different place between the two those two situations. It does a really good job of just showing the difficulty that the characters have existing as either good, like objects of good or objects of evil, and how easily they just cross over each other all the time for different reasons. And the good character acts bad sometimes, the bad character, quote unquote, bad character acts good sometimes. And it leaves you just really having to think about like why your instinct of watching the show is sometimes not right, or why it can be sometimes confusing to watch it and confusing as to how you feel about the characters and what they choose to do.
Yeah, and I think that's the brilliance of the show is how it takes you on a roller coaster ride with every character, because there's no except for like Cy.
Yeah, it's Oliver.
Cy's pretty one-dimensional at this point, but everybody else kind of has this up and down. I should say, let's put this, the best characters have this sort of up and down to them that you're never quite sure what they're going to do, and when they do the thing that they do, you're never quite sure how you feel about it.
Yes.
Because there's always there are always consequences that exist outside of the action itself. I don't know if that makes sense, but what I mean is, I think it's what you're talking about, where it's there's a certain denial of the catharsis of the element, because you know that what they're doing, though cathartic it may be in the moment, is going to topple 5 or 6 other dominoes afterwards.
Yes.
And like that's my favorite thing in stories is, and it's the thing that drives me so nuts in so much of modern television, is that I feel like if you want to compare it to Picard,
I do.
Sure, why not? It's like the time I brought my 1989 Chevy Cavalier to a old antique muscle car show. But like Picard exists solely for the catharsis moment, right?
Right.
Everything they do in Picard is triggering the dopamine response of seeing these characters do cool things, which is fine. If that's what you want, that's fine. Like, I don't think anybody would be happy if you took the character arcs of this show and put them on top of season 3 of Picard. I don't think anybody would be happy with it. I don't even know if I would be happy with it.
No, I mean, not to turn it into a Star Trek podcast, but it is illuminating about the difference in the shows, right? So,
yeah,
I think Darren Mooney, in one of his reviews about Picard recently, made a good point, which is that the Star Trek Picard does not know whether it's prestige television or genre television. And the problem there is that the Deadwood stories don't work because Star Trek is mostly a genre show. So if you started to have prestige television plots laid on top of it, Star Trek Picard tries to do that by doing like the emotional thing, but there is no depth to the problem there on the show in a genre show way. And then like you can have your dopamine response of being an action sci-fi genre show, and that's fine if it's well executed. Picard isn't, but that's the difference, is that Star Trek Picard is trying to layer on complicated adult concepts onto a show that like the foundation of it can't support that idea, or like the way that they choose to execute it is more built around the shoot 'em up dopamine responses.
Right, which is fine. That's just they're different shows. But yeah, the thing, I think that's the secret weapon of this show, is that it is presented as a genre show, but it excels far past that classification, just in how much care they put into the characters and the relationships and the world and this, because like if you think about what's actually going on in this show, it's another thing. I hate to keep comparing it to Star Trek, but
we watch a lot of Star Trek.
We watch a lot of Star Trek, and it's like having the greatest cheat day in the world on a diet that you kind of are just struggling through.
Yep.
Watching a show like this while we're watching Picard. I mean, like the other two things we're watching are Star Trek Voyager season 2. Yeah. Are we in 2? Is it 2 right now?
I think we're in 3. Yeah,
3. Season 3 of Star Trek Voyager. And the third season makeup round of Picard. And then we come and swing into this shit, which is just on a completely different level. And now I've kind of lost my train of thought of what the point I was trying to make was. But oh, I know what it was. If you look at these Star Trek shows, right? And again, genre shows, it's fine.
Yeah.
This is what they do.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we keep complaining about in these newer Star Trek shows is that every season has literally like a galaxy destroying thing that they have to deal with. And and they try to drape so much artificial character stuff on top of it that it just never really works, and it all feels very contrived and overwrought. But if you look at what happens in this season of Deadwood, it's like barely, if you read it in a Wikipedia thing, you probably go like, well, that kind of sounds kind of boring.
Yeah, you could summarize it very efficiently too. It's not.
Yeah.
There's not a tremendous number. Like the storylines are somewhat repetitive in like what Bullock goes through and what Swearengen are going through.
Yeah, and I mean like episode 2 or episode 3 of Deadwood, Al has to deal with another bar opening across the street, and it's like it's fucking awesome,
Yeah.
Like, because the guy who opens the bar is an equal kind of like almost doppelganger type mirror character for the Al Swearengen, and all this other stuff built into it, and even Bullock comes back to camp.
Yeah.
All right, that sounds great, but it's all these little bits, and in this episode, what it all builds to is ultimately like it almost doesn't even. I think I don't want to give people too little credit, but I feel like to a modern television viewer, this would be a very confounding season finale.
Oh,
because I think what it's doing is ultimately so subtle as far as where it's positioning things and like what the big deals are. It's definitely closing off threads, right? Like it's closing off the murder warrant thing, which I'm honestly happy they're doing, because that thing that's the one thread that never really jived with me because it was so weirdly tertiary.
Yeah.
It's closing off the stuff with the Reverend, and
although if they delete that one piece of paper, is there no longer a warrant? Is that how that always worked?
well, Xerox machines didn't exist back then, so there was only the one.
Do you have the warrant?
Now, be that as it may, Magistrate, living as we all do in doubt, please proceed.
General Crook's at the point of making a decision whether to garrison some number of soldiers here or to leave the camp to find its own way. I understand your strong preference in this regard. You must understand that for whatever reason, General Crook has come to trust me and rely on my counsel exclusively. The appropriate gesture made by you toward me would lead me to dissuade the general from the garrison option, as well as clear away from above the cloud of uncertainty regarding your personal liabilities, namely the incident in Chicago.
You have the document of inquiry from Chicago?
The murder warrant. Yes, Al, I do.
On your person?
Yes. Make the appropriate gesture, and the constable hand of the past will no longer weigh upon you.
But, and the stuff with the Reverend obviously is tied up.
Modern audience would say 1 out of 10, Joni Stubbs never got some property.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the big ending moment is the army leaving town.
Yes, yeah,
right. And
nothing happens with the army.
Right,
the army
nothing
leaves,
the army shows up, nothing happens, and then they leave, and it's not really this big climactic whiz bang moment. But in the world of this show, in the stakes that they've given you, it is kind of a big deal seeing where the pieces have been laid and where they have come from since the first episode.
Yeah. I think the guy's name is Peter Coyote, who plays the general. I think that guy's great in this role.
Yeah, he's really good. Yeah. I really liked when he when Cy keeps trying to
him and Cy's dinner together.
Him. Yeah, and then on the way out, he's like, "If I was Marshall, I would have you hanged."
He's an interesting character because he represents Bullock's perception of like ultimate law and authority, right? Which is that he's kind of he's really weird because he speaks a lot of great game about like doing the right thing, and he has the he gives Bullock the little pep talk about like maybe a shit heel shouldn't be the sheriff, like when a man who understands that he has that whole great thing where he recognizes that Bullock has a temper and it got the best of him. And he recommends that a man who recognizes that he has this flaw is like ideally fit to be sheriff and stuff like that. And he has a great line, "We all have bloody thoughts."
Yeah.
It's just but it's also compliment. Like he's not a paragon. Sorry, but he comes in, he does the white supremacist. We destroyed the Indians speech too at the same time. Yeah. So it's this weird ultimate authority where he seems like he's sort of a paragon of virtue because he is righteous against everyone else in Deadwood who's shitty, but he's also there under pretty horrible circumstances too.
The Sioux and the Cheyenne, having burned the prairie to deny us fodder for our mounts. Our provisions limited to what we could carry. We turned for the Black Hills when the rains began.
My bay mare Sheraton found her and he had her shot.
That march through mud was a trial sent by God. And harsh necessity required of us much suffering and great sacrifice.
Ate our fucking horses.
Continuing south, we proved our worth against the Indian. We came upon a village at Slim Buttes, at once attacked from all four sides. Their resistance was overcome. There were no prisoners.
Paid them out, man, woman, and child for me having eaten my mare.
And after the village was taken, we found the gloves of Captain Kia, last seen on his person when he rode into battle with the valiant Custer. Captain. This is the guidon of the 7th Cavalry, captured by the Sioux at the Little Bighorn, and now reclaimed by white men. Chief American Horse and his village are gone, driven off.
Yeah, I really liked that "we all have bloody thoughts" line, not only because it's a great ending to that scene and sort of just really great in the context of the show, but it also felt like the Deadwood way of this guy saying, "Bullock, chill the fuck out, huh?"
Yeah.
Well, like it's because he can read what's going on in Bullock's mind and from talking to him and stuff, and it's very much the kind of thing where it's like, you're not special because you want to punch somebody's face in. We all want to do that. Right. It's just you gotta keep that shit under control.
Yeah, and recognizing that within yourself makes you someone who's obviously self-aware enough to do the job that might need to be done. And Bullock is, Bullock continues down that path of like, he is not a great cop because of it, but it also is true that he, recognizing that is important as opposed to someone who does not regard that at all and the danger that they could be as sheriff or even just not sheriff and just sort of running the town. But the general's great. I think he's a great actor. He has a great gravitas. I just love his interactions with Cy, his interactions with his like Sergeant Bub or whatever that guy's name is, something like that. And when Merrick interviews him and he's like, "I want to get the quotes accurate," and he just goes, "Oh my God."
Well, I was going to say the one thing that I was very confused by is after the parade, they march down to, is it where's he doing the speech in front of? Whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's just in the thoroughfare. It's outside in the main street. Yeah.
The thing that's weird about it is they march all the way down. It's like they got to the dead end, and he can't. For some reason, he doesn't turn around to address the crowd.
Yeah,
he's talking at the building.
Yeah,
which I thought was very strange.
Yeah,
especially when you're trying to project and talk to like hundreds of people. But
it's shot strangely too because you kind of have point of view of Bullock walking through the crowd, and it's hard to see him in the distance. Yeah, but that whole speech is about how they because they've come to avenge Custer and to sort of scatter the Sioux tribes and claim the area, whatever historically was happening. So it's there's a bit of white supremacist rah-rah stuff going on in there as the reasons that they're there. But outside of that, it's just I think he's just a neat contradiction of Milch is really good at doing a lot with very little for characters in that way. I think that the other great example is Otis Russell, who we got a good peek at last episode. In this episode, he really exposes himself, not literally, but he does that great switch, which is that everything that you've known about this guy from the way that Alma interacts with him and the way that the other characters interacted with him in the last episode, once Alma denies or she tries to deny him the gold claim, he immediately comes downstairs and just tells Farnham to fuck off. And it's just like, okay, he's that scene. It honestly, it was interesting to me. It reminds me strongly of the Dark Knight, Nolan's Dark Knight scene, right? So Otis Russell is somewhat similar to the Joker in that he sees with great clarity something that Bullock or Batman is not wanting to see within themselves at that moment.
And he also says, look what I did to this town with just a couple of bolts and some gasoline.
and there's this great scene where Russell or the Joker is talking to Bullock, explaining everything and sort of depicting the way the things are going to be. What I think is really interesting is the turn, which is that in the Batman superhero movie, Batman starts beating the shit out of the Joker, but because it's a comic book movie and the Joker is more thematic than an actual person, he can't hurt him effectively,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
But in this one, Bullock is being lectured about the reasons why you can't hit me, right? The guy's telling him, Bullock, you can't hit me right now because this is the incredible plot that I've laid out and all the things that are going to go wrong when you lay a hand on me. And then Bullock just punches him and knocks all his teeth out. And it's like, and that's the difference between the show and the Batman show. Not the one's better or the other. They're two totally different things. But it's very like the Deadwood thing is Bullock will overreact and do the wrong thing and everything will spread from that event that he did.
You and I are going to talk.
You don't account for my preferences, Mr. Bullock?
I will beat you here in the street.
First-rate thinking. My daughter's agent beats her father in the street. How better to condemn Alma to deepen suspicion as to her role in her husband's violent death. And widen suspicion to include yourself. Were you bullied, Mr. Bullock, when young and incapable? And now you see wrongs everywhere in bullying you feel called to remedy? 10 they do.
New shooter coming out.
The bully who oppressed your youth isn't at the table with us. Perhaps he's long dead.
8. The point is
if you would view the present with more clarity, perhaps you'd recognize that I'm not victimizing my daughter, but merely asking for a small portion of the ample proceeds from her veins.
7 out.
Alma is hurt only in your particular view of things. 10 again they do. And while I'll sign no guarantee not to return or against any future claim on her compassion, realize I do hate it here. And if you inhale and expel pure righteousness, my olfactories are keen to the smell of shit.
6. The point is 6.
Having heard all that, and knowing, as you must, the injudiciousness of making an enemy of a man who could testify truthfully that 5 minutes before her marriage, he heard his daughter wish her prospective husband dead, and who won't shrink from lying as to what she admitted to him on his arrival in this cesspool as to her complicity in her husband's murder, I suppose you'd best take your swing.
Gentlemen, watch the felt.
Yeah, the only thing that he didn't do in that scene while he was explaining why Bullock couldn't hit him was put on a pair of glasses and pull out his diplomatic immunity card.
That damn card. That'll always get you through these situations. It's tough.
Yeah.
He's great. Russell's great in that scene.
Yeah, he is.
I think.
Yeah.
Just the explanation. The fact that he goes down and does this thing that I'm assuming is what's causing him to have these debts in the first place. He just throws away money at the craps table.
Yeah. That was, I really.
Eddie has, when they started fighting, Eddie's story just goes, "Gentlemen, mind the felt."
I really like that scene when he's talking to Alma and he's explaining about how he needs her to leverage her claim to take out some money on credit because he has debts. And she's like, "I thought I paid your debts when I got married to the rich guy." He's like, "Oh yeah, you did. I have new ones now." No,
it's even longer. She's like, "Oh, do you have interest on your old debts?" He's like, "No, I just made new debts."
Yeah. And I mean, he just goes, for how relatively restrained they are with him. And I understand they have to, it's the last episode of the season. They got to tie this shit up. But for how restrained they were with him the previous episode, they really just start laying it on pretty thick in this one, which is fine. I think it works.
Yeah.
Because I mean, you know, if you don't, the show runs the risk of every couple episodes somebody new shows up to camp and kind of speaks obliquely about why they're there, and then they just kind of hang around for 5 episodes.
Yeah.
So it's nice to kind of get somebody in, get somebody out in a couple episodes and have them be useful and then move on.
Yeah, I think his turn is largely fine because he's sort of realized that his like sweet talking of Alma is not going to work, and Alma starts standing up for herself in that scene where she's talking to her father, and he quickly shuts it down. And you get a great sense of Alma as to like why she couldn't go back home and the kind of helplessness that a woman of her like even though she's wealthy, a woman of her status in that town has no ability to control her own destiny. Really, like she has to go to Bullock to get help to deal with Russell, and just the fact, just like the cold-hearted denial, he's like, "No, I'm not going to allow you to tell me not to take your gold claim from you." Is just another smattering of the like incredible daddy issues that are in this because Bullock in that sequence, Otis Russell says something about like he's like, "Were you bullied, Mr. Bullock, when you were young and incapable, and now you see wrongs everywhere, and bullying you feel called to remedy? The bully who oppressed your youth isn't at this table with us. Perhaps he's long dead." The behind-the-scenes stuff that's never really mentioned in the show, but Milch has talked about in the book that I've read and everything, is that
did he learn a secret truth about Timothy Oliphant, that he was severely bullied as a child?
he wondered why his father,
against him in the show.
Why his father wasn't coming to any of the shoots, and he's like, "It's because your father beat you severely, didn't he?" Yeah, it's just Bullock's upbringing is supposed to just be that his father was a violent alcoholic who beat him severely, so that's Bullock's motivation. But we learned a lot about all the different fathers in Deadwood. We learned that Alma's father's a piece of shit. We learned that Joni Stubbs' father would use her dead mother's wishes to have sex with his children and then sold them into prostitution. So not a lot of good father issues.
That was one of the more depressing stories told with the most upbeat demeanor I've seen in a while.
Yeah.
And you know, it kind of, it's not obviously not to this extent, but it reminded me of one time my mother's sisters were all over having dinner. And they didn't have a great upbringing. The dad was an alcoholic. Their mother was a pill popper. And they were telling these stories about crazy shit that their parents did, like horrible stuff. And they were all just like laughing hysterically as they were telling it, and telling it with a looking back with a humorous bent to it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same thing where it's like sometimes these things, the only way you can really kind of deal with them is to kind of put on a smile about it.
Yeah.
You know, when Joni tells that story,
being free of it changes the perspective. I think usually the people are dead when people start laughing about it.
Yeah, and I mean the way that Joni very kind of politely and almost in a chipper way tells a story about how her father used to rape her and sold her into prostitution. It's like, yeah, okay. I mean, I guess if you're going to tell that story, that's the only way you can really do
well,
it.
it's the. I mean, Joni must have walked in and she's like, "Oh, finally, I can tell the story about being raped by my father and wishing that he would be beaten to death in front of everybody day and night." It's like this is the perfect, almost your perfect muse for this.
I've been bringing this story up at dinner parties for years, and people always kind of cringe. It never feels relevant, but now, finally,
here it is.
It's relevant.
She didn't rush it either. She got right through it. Great writing from Milch in this one, too. I wrote down two double entendre phrases that I like. When Otis Russell is talking to Bullock about the gold, he says, "I just need a small portion of the ample proceeds from her veins," which I think is a nice double entendre about the gold veins and just stealing the soul, basically, from his daughter. And then when the general is having his speech, he says that America is coming, and of which I am certain this camp will soon be a part, as all the horribleness is happening around him as he's giving the speech between the Chinese race war that's coming and the sheriff being corrupt and everything. So I like the play on words about being a part, as in broken, and a part of something larger. So I think he did a couple lines of dialogue there like that. But outside of that, just the typical Milchian kind of genius about fuck the cavalry and the committee that receives them is a great line. And I think what might be... Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Just might be the I always put a little quote at the top of the blurb of the episode, and I thought that this one was kind of fitting, which is that when Wu goes to meet Swearengen and he leaves in a huff because of the murder that Con Stapleton has done, Swearengen yells after him, "Did you come to this camp for justice or to make your fucking way?" Which I think is a nice summary of Al's deliberations at that point.
Yeah, I liked the back and forth with, I think it was the doctor, which ended with him saying a human being in his last extremity is a bag of shit.
Now fuck you, Al.
Yeah, that was great. Well, that's what's so. I mean, the doctor has just like every scene he's in is bulletproof in this show.
Yeah.
Walk in unannounced is a good way to get yourself killed, Doc, especially as the cavalry has us besieged.
I'm here about the minister. He's over at my place. Past my heart if I had any. He's damn near blind, mostly paralyzed. Past controlling his functions.
Well, you're preaching to the fucking converted. I would have seen to him, but I've been fucking busy.
Well, he doesn't want to be seen to like that.
What the fuck are we talking about?
A man being cared for and made comfortable till he expires. Girls you put to the task, deduct your time from my pay.
I get the bag of shit.
You get to care for a human being in his last extremity.
A human being in his last extremity is a bag of shit.
Oh, fuck you, Al!
Seeing him really stand up to Al that way, the scene where he's praying to God is like, man, I don't know how. Did anybody from this show ever win anything?
No, I don't think it won acting. Yeah,
Brad Dourif is just killing it on this show.
Yeah. That's that whole sequence is great, and it not to harp on it, but that the patron comment about not feeling something the way that the Dourif thing is intercut with what Swearengen does to the Reverend Smith, and the dialogue from both of them, and Dourif is crushing it in that scene. The murder of Smith is also really good, but it's like that's just a sad sequence, really. The room gets a little bit dusty when that happens. Dourif screaming about like the Civil War soldiers calling for their mother, which is I always think about the and all these like bullshit.
That's the scene that brings you the most joy.
Yeah, that's just remembering that remembering when those slaveholders got their legs shot off. The thing that like in all the stories about the shitty cops and the stuff that goes wrong in modern day, but there's always one of the things that's always consistent about those stories is that the dying person like almost always calls for their mother. And I just thought it was a nice touch in that that is consistent in the Dourif story and like what seems to be like a real thing that happens in real life. it's like extra heartbreaking in that sense, and just it's a Milchian monologue, and he destroys it. And the thematic subtext of it is that he gets the "Thy will is done," and Swearengen is apparently God's instrument to end the suffering of someone whose suffering is causing distress amongst the body, and everyone needs to know their role. This is Swearengen's role. Swearengen smothers Smith. The Johnny Burns and Dan Doherty are brought to tears from it. And then Swearengen just tells him, "You can go now, brother," as the parts of the body are there to help each other, and some parts of the body have to be removed at a certain point. It's great. I think they're excellent, and it's the pinballing of Swearengen at that point is that to do that, where does that stand morally, and then just to go into more of an outright like out for his own good thing with Claggett upstairs is just a wonderful pinballing back and forth for that character.
Yeah, and going back to the mother thing, it can be kind of a cliche to write that, but I think it depends on how you handle it. And here, I think it's highlighting that like everybody wants to die like a badass, right? You know, you want to have some great final words. Ironically enough, I just watched John Wick 4 last night, and in which Ian McShane relays a story about Ned Kelly, the Australian outlaw. His final words before he was hanged were "such is life." Yeah, and he's talking about how baller that is to be your final words or whatever. And it's like, yeah, everybody wants that, but what the reality of it is you turn into a blubbering mess, and you're just reaching out for the most base possible thing there would be to protect you, which is your mother.
Yes.
And it's always heartbreaking and always depressing. But I think what's interesting about the Reverend into the Claggett stuff is it is just this great juxtaposition of Al, of these two characters, one of whom had been struggling to live his life and get by and come to such a pathetic end, versus this other guy who thinks he's the king shit up there, trying to get every penny he can. And that's probably like they don't. I feel like another show would have Al give a big monologue stating this stuff, but like I feel like that's the worst possible time Claggett could have asked him for anything. Right, is right after he had to kill that reverend. Like his any sort of compassion or if you want to call it that he might have towards Claggett. Yeah, like consideration or like willingness to bend for him a little bit. Yes, get around it. Yeah. Not the time. Not the time. Claggett handled it, although, Claggett handled himself fairly well to the end. I think he knew he was in there going to die that entire time. He's trying to talk Al out of it by trying to lay like one last, I have the general's ear. Like if I can live, I can be able to be useful to you to convince things. And it doesn't end that way. He doesn't go down as a blubbering mess, but Al still ends that thing with, and he learns that Silas Adams is on his side for now and forever, I suppose, going forward. Young Adams, as he's called. Young Bosch. I don't know what happens. I don't think the other guy sticks around. I don't know what happens to him, though, the butler character. I'm curious to know or see what Bosch's role is going to be moving forward. Yep. Because, I don't know. I don't know where he slots in Al's organization. Because you think he overlaps with Dan Doherty a little bit? Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking like character wise, like what is Al getting out of this guy now that Claggett's dead? Is he a connection to other people? Mm-hmm. Is he just another guy who's loyal to him that's just going to be bumming around? Is it just that he seems to be smart? Yeah, that makes him. Yeah, I think that's what makes him different. Yeah, is that he's not. Dan is more of the. In this one, they have the great scene where Claggett is talking to
Al, and Al is threatening Claggett, and Claggett says that those are the days that are behind us, and Al says those are the days to my left, and he points to Dan.
Yeah, that was really good.
Dan is just the guy who's going to kill people, but he's not the thoughtful political analyst that Adams is.
Yeah.
So that's the difference between the two of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm curious to see where it goes.
Outside of that, I'm just looking over my notes here. Anything else?
I found the beginning of the love scene very funny.
Yep.
Because it almost started like a Naked Gun gag where she is struggling to get out of her corset.
Yeah, her 50 layers of clothes. So.
Yeah, they do this like sexy glamour shot of her opening the corset to reveal a second corset.
Yeah. And Bullock is doing his best like LL Cool J licking his lips impersonation as it cuts back to him. I
mean, I don't know about that. It was more of him going like, I'm married. I'm married. I'm married.
Not
I'm
really married. Yeah, what do you I always find that scene funny because when he shuts the door, he's clearly deciding what he wants to do, and he's just looking at the door for a long time as she kind of like peeks around the corner to see what's going on.
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah,
and the other Deadwood thing is at the era is at the very end when he's out on Swearengen's like deck and he's looking across at her. And she opens her like her robe, and it's just like a nightie on underneath. Mm-hmm. It's like it's not the modern movie of just like American Beauty or something where she just like exposes her breasts. It's just like, here's my nightie that I wear.
I kept expecting him to respond to that by like angling his shoulder forward so she could see that he had the badge on or something like that.
Oh yeah, no, not.
But no, he's just looking, baby.
Yeah, I mean that's why I think that that's partially why he becomes the sheriff at the end, is because when Alma's father's people come back at them, he needs to be in a position that is more influential than what he was before that.
Yeah.
It also makes sense that he is the sheriff, and it makes Al very happy that that's the case. That scene makes me laugh. He's like, "Do you have the tin?" "I do." "Produce it." Pin it to your tit. I know how it goes.
He's even in that moment, he's still being shitty to Bullock in a way that he knows that he can, niggle him by being like, it goes on your chest. He's like, I know where it goes. Ass.
I'm going to walk past that blood stain that's mysteriously appeared on my floor as I go to tend to my business issues.
I also, you were talking about how good Milch is at doing a lot with a little with certain characters, and even in this episode, EB has like 2 scenes.
Yeah, he's not in there a lot.
He's not, but like what they give him is really good when he comes in and is all in a huff about. He would have liked to have known that the cavalry had arrived, and Al just does that thing where he goes, "EB, the cavalry's arrived."
Do you want to be the hosannas? Yeah, because he gives them the to get them. Al knows how to distract him. He gives them the ability to like sell them provisions or something, and then that's one of the reasons that they leave is because EB's driving too hard of a bargain for provisions, so the soldiers just decide to leave the town.
I want to know what Saul's going to do with all those guns.
I know
he traded shovels for. Can you sell that? Can he sell those in his store? Like, how does that work?
I guess you would have to resell them out, I guess. I was curious about the like back then, was a gun more valuable than it is today? I was wondering, because I would have thought that they would be less valuable, but that might not be the case because of the way that they're produced. So I wasn't sure.
Well, I guess it all depends on what you mean by valuable, because
in terms of actual costs, like would
well, but like if you're talking about it in the situation like this where what is a working pistol, an army issue working pistol worth in the frontier?
Yes,
you know what I mean. Where, like it's probably more valuable,
more reliable.
In Deadwood,
yeah.
Where it's probably more valuable in some place like Deadwood than it would be in like New York.
Yeah, I guess I was wondering this because I would assume that guns were more of a consistent presence back then than they are now.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, like, if everyone has a gun, is trading in your gun worth as much at that point?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I've always, for all the Westerns that I've seen, I've always assumed that the way that guns were is like anything you buy on Amazon now, where there's just like a billion different versions of it, but you can't tell which one's the good one.
Right.
There's always one guy who's got the good one, and then there's always the other guy who pulls out the shitty one.
Right. Yeah.
It's like, that one, you got that one for $15 because it had 1,000 5-star reviews, didn't you?
Yeah, maybe your point about the being just a U.S. military grade weapon might be something more impressive about it. So that's always.
I mean, that is assuming that who knows what the quality control was for
right.
that,
Yeah, then that's another just assumption about what it is.
The before we wrap up, I did want to talk about one of my favorite scenes, only because it is like a quintessential Western scene, and every time they do it in a movie or anything, it always works and is always very exciting. Which is it's not the actual fight, but it's the positioning of everybody around the fight. Yep. So this comes when Seth goes over to beat up Alma's father. You get him going over there, but you're also cutting in and checking in on every other one of the characters who's involved to see how they're reacting to the building tension of Seth going over there to kick the shit out of this guy.
They all kind of come out of their buildings if they're in a building and watch what's going on.
And I love that stuff. Like, I love it when, one guy comes in and then you see another guy like move over to the bar, and one guy kind of like reaches down and pulls out the shotgun and kind of puts it in a hidden place. And they kind of cut back and forth the faces. That's what's so much fun about the Western thing. Like the gunfight is usually not. Well, it depends on the movie, I guess. But like the Sergio Leone style gunfight, it's not the firing of the weapons that's the fun part.
Yeah,
it's everything that leads up to the firing of the weapons. You know.
Yeah.
And so it's fun to see them do something very, very Western-y in this episode.
Yeah. It's there are a great number of witnesses to what Bullock does there. I always like it. Just the sort of lack of reaction from people is always kind of distinct or something. It is a kind of a Western trope, and obviously they're all used to it. But there is, it does just reinforce this idea that like the place is more bound by cultural norms and traditions than it is any sense of law that goes on with it. Because Stapleton certainly wasn't going to do anything there. I guess we should talk about the race war aspect.
I was going to say, unless you're a Chinese guy, and then all bets are off.
Yeah. Leon continues to do his hard sell of the impending race war for Cy Tolliver, accusing the Chinese of using lye to wash the clothes and blind him, which ends up getting one of the Chinese shot by Con Stapleton, which is the reason that Bullock takes back the badge from him at that point. But yeah, I guess that's the reason I didn't remember it in the prior episode, because it's not a super important bit, and it doesn't escalate from there because Cy doesn't win in this episode. He doesn't get a lot of things. He doesn't get the race war, and he doesn't get the soldiers to stay back and be his militia.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too. Is that, and I don't know, given what you've said about how they kind of wrote this show a bit on the fly. And we've talked about this a little bit where it feels like they've got a lot of balls in the air, but they don't necessarily know which ones are going to be the important ones.
Yep.
And so I find it interesting that they kind of put these things in play for Cy, which are options for big things. Like you very easily could have, your big thing in this episode could have been a race war breaks out in Deadwood.
Yep. Or Cy just gets a private army for himself.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's, if the episode, I think the much more conventional ending of this is like Cy gets an army.
Yeah.
And so now he has the upper hand kind of thing, but it's not that kind of show. And so to see him try to maneuver these things, and maybe maybe the difference between him and Al is he's going a little too big and bigger than he's capable of actually pulling off or something.
Yeah.
He makes some moves and they don't work.
Yeah, Cy's not
simple as that.
Cy's not great at reading the other party sometimes. Swearengen's a little bit better at reading what the other side wants and reacting to it, and as he says it with the case of like the specialists in the other episode. Tolliver is more myopic and thinks that because he's interested in a lot of money, the general is therefore going to be interested in a lot of money?
Because there's at least one scene beforehand where it's when the general is indirectly complaining about having to stay at EB's place, where Tolliver offers him to stay at the Bella Union. I forgot about Merrick going brothel. But in that moment, Cy kind of puts it out there that anything you want, General, and he's like, no, I'm not interested in that.
Yeah.
Blah 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 blah.
Yeah, the general makes him get rid of the prostitution if he's going to stay there. Yeah.
Right. And I think Al would recognize, based on that, the kind of person that he's dealing with. But Cy is the kind of person who's like, well, if it's not this, it's got to be something else. There's got to be something else I can buy this guy with.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's that fits in, just to call back to the general. The general apparently just can't be bought, which is like he offers them the young girl, he offers them the alcohol, he offers them money, and he just can't get through this guy.
$50,000, a lot of money back then.
That must have been like $1 billion. I don't know what that was. Yeah, it's a lot of money. Are you still there?
What year does this take place in? Sorry, I'm looking up what the inflation rate has been since then.
1876. So
1876.
As you look up what the inflationary
$50,000 in 1876 would be $1.4 million today.
Yeah. Because Cy says that we add $10,000 worth of currency every day to the economy, which is tremendous amounts of money. So they. Do you think the show? Does the show reflect that? Is it doing a good enough job of reflecting the amount of wealth that's being generated? Maybe not wealth.
I don't think so.
Yeah, because you wonder where they don't have a bank yet, or right? You wonder where it goes.
Yeah, as far as I can see from what the show's giving me, the only element of wealth that is really being talked about is the gold claim. And
Alma's gold claim specifically.
Yes, Alma's gold claim. Yes. And so, I have no idea what the economics of the even when they were setting up the different positions that they were all vying for.
Yep.
And they were talking about collecting money for the payoff and stuff. I had no sense of whether or not the taxes or whatever that they were going to be levying was going to be asking a lot or asking a little.
Yeah. Well, because it comes to me like Al and Cy must be making money hand over fist. You'd think they would easily have enough to build their own personal army at that point,
Right, yeah.
So it's a little bit...
I think it's also tough because just visually, everything in Deadwood looks like shit.
Yes,
isn't covered in shit. And so it's tough to tell, where the money's going.
No, it's that's the divide. Otis Russell brings it up how he hates it there and thinks that it's an awful place. But it's like the money, the origin of the money, it has not been cleaned sufficiently to get to those other kinds of characters, and it's out there somewhere, but it's hard to say. It's just being used to buy whores and liquor really at that point, and then being spread out from there. So, let's see here. I think that's pretty much everything that we've talked about. Any other character we saw Joni? Oh, the other Charlie Utter doesn't have a lot to do in this episode either.
No, Jane never came back. Buys breakfast.
Yeah, he buys breakfast. Yeah. And Calamity Jane never came back from her episode where she left, so she'll come back eventually. That's it. So, thoughts on the first season, I guess, before we head out of here.
Oh, that was great. Yeah, it's a great show.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. So, thanks for watching it with me.
I was talking to a couple friends the other night, and I was mentioning we were watching Deadwood, and they said, "Yeah, we watched it a couple years ago, but it was okay." I think because we didn't watch it when it was on, it felt a little bit like they were trying too hard to be like, "Oh, look what we can do on TV," as far as the violence and the swearing and the sex and stuff. And I was kind of surprised that was the takeaway, because obviously that stuff is all there, but I have never felt like that was all there was to the show. Like it is a very well written and well constructed show to me.
I don't find it gratuitous in its violence and sex. Yeah. There's nothing sexy about its sex. Really, like the Seth and Alma sex scene is the sexiest thing in it. The rest of it is portrayed as pretty either horrible or dirty or unappealing. And
I think that's part of it too. That's part of what they were saying, is that it is portraying this stuff in a very kind of grimy kind of.
Oh, I see.
In a way you don't generally see on television, you know?
Yeah. Because we talked about it earlier too, like a lot of early feedback from people who did watch it in the era was that they thought that their opinion from like the trailers and teasers was just that the show was excessively swearing for its language, like to push the envelope in terms of swearing.
Yes.
But I think as we've talked about, like that drops away the more you watch it and the more you understand what the language is doing and how the dialogue is layered. It's like if you're the kind of person who says that the Deadwood writing is just swearing, I don't think you've watched the show, really.
Yeah. I was actually, I noticed in this episode in particular, probably the least amount of profanity front to back. Like I wasn't taking notes or anything, but
don't have a ticker going in the bottom bar.
I have to tell the parents' council, so they can put out the clean version to watch.
Yeah, Al Gore is angrily watching this and taking notes. Or Tipper Gore, whichever one was responsible. Yeah.
But yeah, it just felt like it didn't feel like they were relying on that as much as they had in the past. There's a couple here and there, but it didn't seem like it was as all encompassing as it kind of was in the early episodes. Like the early episodes definitely do lean on the spectacle of the language a bit more.
Yeah.
But it seemed like it kind of evened itself out a bit.
Yeah.
When it got as later in the season.
Agreed. Yeah, I like this season. I will say it's not really spoiler. I think this is the season of Deadwood that ends the strongest out of all three of them. And I think that it does a pretty good job of demonstrating the show's improvisational nature and the way that it was written and how things just changed as Milch realized what he had in front of him and who the actors and actresses were. It continues to be a show that it does just defy the idea that like events have to happen in your TV show. It's smartly written. Yeah. It's just really clever. The wordplay is great. I continue to recommend if people rewatch the episodes, watch them with the subtitles on, and you will gain a tremendous amount of appreciation for just the way that the syntax of the sentences is written and the way that the characters say things.
They need to put out the annotated Deadwood, where you remember in like high school and when you did Shakespeare, they had those versions of the books that were the actual text on one side and then like the translated modernized text on the other side.
Yeah.
They need that. There was I remember there used to be a website, a blog that it was all translations of Notorious B.I.G.'s lyrics.
Yep.
Because so much of his lyrics are like multi-layered references to stuff and all this other kind of stuff. And it was you need one of those for Deadwood.
You do. You need a translation for the non-17 or 1876 character who is not hypocrite enough to read it. A good one. My favorite episode of the season, I think. And it's tough because it all builds towards it, and that's everything that you want to be expecting. But I find every scene in this one pretty delightful. I find all the characters to be delightful, and I think that it ends pretty well. And I guess just my final thoughts about the very final scene with I find that touching too, just Doc dancing with Jewel, who he's made the boot for.
That was great.
Trixie and Al make eye contact, and Trixie looks away first, and then Swearengen has kind of a bemused look on his face, and that's the way that it ends. So that's it. Anything else you want to say, or are we done?
I think we're good.
We are done. This is Something Pretty, and that was Sold Under Sin. Thanks, everybody, for listening. You can support the show at patreon.com/The Pensky File. You can listen to the Star Trek show. We have the Rotten Horror show with Clay and Amanda. We have the Badass, the animated series. Talking about Batman, the animated series on that podcast with Clay and Sean. And that's it. Thanks for listening, everybody. I think we're just going to go right into season 2. We're not going to have a wrap-up episode, Clay, because I don't think it suits the show at all.
Yeah.
But
I feel like we kind of covered everything.
Yeah, it's and it's less defined by sort of like changes in the way the perspective works of the showrunners and stuff. So that's it. Anything you want to say before we head out?
No, I don't think so. Check out on Patreon. We're doing Video Nasties this year. Amanda and I are, January was Tenebrae, February was Possession, and March was Flesh for Frankenstein. I watched that one just went up, and I watched a special feature on the Blu-ray of Flesh for Frankenstein Blu-ray. It was an interview with the director from a handful of years ago, and that movie was one of the titles it was sold as was Andy Warhol's Frankenstein.
Yep.
Because the guy who made this movie was the guy who worked with Andy Warhol when he was making films, and a number of them were like co-produced or something like that. And this interview from like 2016, I would say 70% of it was this guy just essentially calling Andy Warhol a no-talent cocksucker. It was like every time they'd come back to it, he'd be like, and he had nothing to do with this movie. I don't know why his name was on it. He never came to the set. He wasn't even an artist. He couldn't even talk. He kept saying that over and over again. The guy couldn't even talk. He didn't even know what a movie was.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he sold your tickets, and Google SEO is what he provided to your film, I think, 30 years later. Yeah, you guys can. What's the April movie? Because it would be April by the time it comes out, I think.
April is Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, which is our first Italian gorehound movie. So that's going to be fun. Makes very little sense and leans very heavily into over-the-top gore special effects. So.
Cool. Thanks, everybody, for listening. This is Something Pretty. Support the show at patreon.com/thepensky-file. Leave a review on Apple if that is so helpful. Spotify and Apple, those are the two that if you happen to be there, please leave a review. That would be much appreciated. It helps at least convince people who are browsing that other people have listened to the podcast. So, thanks, everybody. We'll be back next week with A Lie Agreed Upon, Part 1. See you then.
I was a marshal in Montana. My father served in the British Royal Army, and my brother Robert was a cavalryman, killed fighting the Comancheros in Texas.
Why are you here, Mr. Bullock?
A man named Otis Russell is laid up in this establishment. He needs protection.
Protection from whom?
Several in this camp. I beat him badly. Others have reason to wish him dead, and the camp sheriff can be bought off for half a can of bacon grease.
Well, while we're here, I will hold Mr. Russell under protection as a gesture to your brother's sacrifice.
Thank you, sir.
I would add, in a camp where the sheriff can be bought for bacon grease, a man, a former marshal, who understands the danger of his own temperament, he might consider serving his fellows.